You can also right-click and ask for help. And then, this one only has labels. Sometimes you get full-on descriptions of how the component works, right? So I want to define a vector, right? So I go to vector, and I go to vector. And on vector, I see I can construct a vector, just like I did the construct point, right? But then in this other section here, I see that I have a unit vector, which I'm not sure what that means, unitizing a vector. But then here I have unit x, unit y, and unit z, right? Unit vector parallel to the world z-axis, right? So that's really simple, just defining z as the vector we want to move in, right? Or defining y or defining x, right? So for the tower, I'm going to choose z, right? And now the vector is asking for something else. But yet, even though this was already moving in the z direction, it's not moving as much as it was before, right? Again, we hover over motion, and we see that where what used to be 10 on the z is now 1, right? And I understand that this is an input, right? Because it's on the left-hand side of move, and it's coming from unit z. So if I move to the right side of unit vector, I see that unit vector is outputting 0, 0, 1, right? If I backtrack even more, I go to the input of unit z, I see that factor has been defaulted to 1, right? So you can hover through and see how the data is carrying through. So I see that factor for unit z in this case is defaulting to 1.0. Since this is defining the z direction, when motion is reading that, it's reading 1 and it's reading z, right? So that's how that shows up, 0, 0, 1 over there. So I can create a number slider for z. Let's say 1.5, right? And so now as I change that, I'm changing how much this is moving in the z direction. Is everybody following me so far? Does anybody need anything to be repeated or clarified? Okay. Now, I moved this, right? But am I going to, if I want 50 floors, am I going to create 50 moves? No, right? So that's where your data sets or your lists come in here, right? So I'm going to delete this number slider. I'm going to say, okay, I need to, if I want 50 floors, I need 50 numbers to be plugged into here, right? Because if I'm saying I have this polygon and I want to move it with 50 values, right? Something can't exist here and also exist over there, right? So if I tell it move to 50 places, it's going to copy itself to be in those 50 places. Does that make sense? So I'm going to go to sets, right? And I could go to list, but I see that under list, it's mostly modifying lists, right? Reversing a list, partitioning a list, list item, retrieving a specific item from one list, right? Whether it be geometry or whether it be a number. Replacing items, so on. So I'll move on to sequence, right? Calling index and calling patterns, not really something that's familiar to what I'm trying to look for right now. But I move down and I see I have a sequence, create a sequence of textual characters. I'm not looking for text. And under that I have series. Create a series of numbers, right? That could be promising. So I put that in. And cool, so series is asking for a start, which is a number, 0.0, a step, which is in this case is defaulting to 1.0, and a count, right, which is defaulting to 10. So when I hover over the output, what does that mean? Oh, I have 10 values, 10 locally defined values, and then I notice the first one is 0.0, the next one is 1.0, the next one is 2.0, 3.0, and so on all the way to 9, right? So what I can deduce from that is my starting number, the first number in the series, is set to 0, 0. And when I look at my output, the first number there is 0, 0. My step is 1.0. And if I hover over my outputs, every number after the starting number is increasing by 1. Right? So I understand that step is adding 1 every time, right, to the previous value. Count is set to 10, right? And here I have 10 values, so I understand that count means how many numbers I'm going to get. So how does this translate to our tower, right? So I want the first floor, since we live in Florida, I want the first floor to be 2 feet off the ground. Is that still a thing? It's 2 feet because of draining. So, and then I wanted to step the height of each floor, right? So I want each floor to be 15 feet or 12 feet. I forget what these things are. So 15 feet. And then my count, right? How many floors do I want? Let's go for 40, right? So now when I look at my output, I see, yes, my first number is 2. My next number is 17, 32, 47, 62, 77. So it's increasing every floor by 15 feet every time, right? So then I plug in that series to the factor. And like I said, it's going to create copies of it because there's more than one value coming in. Yes?
If you wanted the first floor to be like, say, 20 feet and then the rest one 15 or 10, would you just have to put another marker in there, like another script right where the step is?
Well, you can change this number to whatever you want, right? So as I'm moving this one, you see the starting point is changing?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
No, I'm saying, like, imagine if you, like you say, it's 2 feet, you have a slab that's 2 feet off the ground. Imagine, like, the lobby or something would be 15 feet, and then every floor past that would be just 10.
Okay.
Be able to make one floor different, or like.
I see what you mean. Yeah. So kind of like this, like if, ooh, sorry. All right, I just zoomed out too much and I lost myself. That's okay because right down here I have a compass. You see that? And it tells me where the origin, it says find your way home. It tells me where the origin of my script was. So I can know I got to pan to the corner this way. So, right, so let's say like you want that original polygon to be the base and you want the lobby to be 15 feet tall and then all the other floors be different heights.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, vary.
Okay, so then I'll create a move for this polygon, right? And sure, I'll copy paste this and I'll say, okay, I need the slab of the first floor to be 2 feet off the ground, right? And also you can copy paste just by selecting a component. I'm sure you've noticed by now, but when you select a component, it highlights green in Grasshopper and it highlights green in Rhino. And you can just Control C, Control V, and it'll paste over it. It'll even keep those inputs, right?
Oh, so you'd have to make a whole nother script that connects to it.
No, well, for what you're saying?
Yeah.
No, so I'm just first moving that polygon 2 feet off the ground. So I'm establishing that as the ground, right? Now I'm establishing the height of that first floor, right? Because I want that to be different. So now I can do that here. Let's say I want the lobby to be 15 feet, like you're saying. Right? And then I want every other floor to be 12 feet. Okay. Now, I'm seeing more than I want to. I don't need this original polygon anymore, right? Because that's just the base. I'm not really building geometry off of it, really. So I'm going to select everything I've done so far. And then spacebar is a quick menu, right? So you have a couple things. I can group these things together, right? And I can call this whatever group it is I want it to be. I can disable it. So if there's a part of the script that I'm not using and it's taking up resources, I can disable it. And now it's not calculating any of those components. They're not active. But however, everything else that comes after it can't work off of nothing, right? So just keep that in mind. And then here, this guy with a blindfold is a preview and disable preview. So I'm going to disable seeing that original point and that base curve. So here you have the first floor, 2 feet off the ground. And then here you have the lobby, which is 15 feet off. And then every other floor, which is 12 feet off. Right? However, all the other floors are separate from my lobby ground. Right? So to bring those together now, I would use a merge. Right? And now we can see here that if I merge my first floor to data 1, and then the rest to data 2, now I have one list where it's 41 values. So my 40 stories, as well as my ground floor. This merge component is going to combine different lists, right, or different outputs. Yeah? Okay. Are you sure? Yeah. So, okay. Now, I want to make sure that this is, in fact, part of the same list. So I'm going to pull up a panel. right? And with a panel, I can preview with text what exactly is my output or input and so forth. So I'm going to connect this geometry to the panel, and I can see, okay, closed planar curve, right? And there's 40 of them. These numbers on the left are indexes. That's going to be important later. An index number, right, like 27, is simply to identify that curve from the rest of them, right? So if I want to, remember we went into lists here, list item. So let's say I only wanted to edit curve number 27. I would plug this in here, and then I would plug in index 27, right? And then I can identify curve 27 here, right? Pretty simple. So here I see that, okay, out of my series, all my curves are part of the same list. They're all, right? It's not branched out, and that's going to be important later. Just basically, this is one branch, this grayed out thing. This is branch 0, 0, or list 0, 0, and it contains all these curves. So when I merged that first curve, I want to make sure that they're part of the same branch. In this case, they're not, right? In this case, when I went to merge, yes, they're part of the same output. They're coming out of the same node now, but they're not really together. There's two curves that are identified by index 0. And when I look over here, I have branch 0, and I have branch 0, 0. And that's why I'm getting a dashed line, right? Those two branches are two separate operations, right? It's even people that have been working with Grasshopper for a while have a hard time wrapping their head around this, so don't worry about it for now, okay? But just keep in mind that this is how things carry through, right? You either branch things into different groups, or you have everything grouped as one thing. So in this case, to bring this all together, because I want to treat all these floors the same way, I don't want to exclude that, or I don't want that lobby curve to be operating independently from all the other floors, right? So in order to create just one branch, I would right-click the output, right? And remember we said like all inputs and outputs have these options, right? Flattening gets rid of all those divisions, all those branches, and it just creates one branch, right? So when I flattened, I get this down symbol, right? This down arrow symbol. And now I only have one branch, branch 0, and I have, remember before we have 40 curves, but it only goes up to index 39, right? That's because we start at 0, not at 1. So 40 would actually create an index of 39. So now that we have 41 curves, yes, 40 curves defined by this move, created by this series, plus this original curve that we're merging to that list of 40, that should create 41 curves. And if we go all the way down, we see index 40. Right, so we understand because we start from 0, we understand that if we count to 40 starting at 0, I have 41 curves. Good so far?
I don't get that.
You don't get the list thing? Okay, but do you understand that this is combining, right, these two outputs into just one output, right? So just worry about that. Just worry about the fact that what this is doing is it's
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I do understand.
Right?
I just don't have it.
You don't have the merge?
It doesn't come, the whole list is just 1, 3, 1, 0.
Oh, if you go to the bottom of the panel, you can stretch it. You can see more. Okay, so now I know I can modify all these curves, all these floors as a set, right? So I'm just going to introduce a rotation to this, right, and have this rotate. So to do that, I'm going to search for rotate, and I get a couple of results. Rotate an object in a plane, maybe, I don't know. Rotate an object in a plane also, but the difference between these two is I can understand, if you see, it's really small on the screen, but if you're searching for the same thing I am, you'll notice that this one is rotating around what looks like a point and 2 arrows, right? So I can kind of deduce this is probably working with a center point and vectors. There you go, right? I hover over from and to, and I get the symbol for vector, right? So there's a graphic language here. If I search for rotate, I see that point, I see those 2 arrows, and that's right. When I put that component in here, I see that it's actually asking for a point and then 2 vectors, right? However, this one's just asking for a plane, right? And I already established a plane. When I created the tower, I established a defaulted construct point. I designated a construct point defaulted to the XY plane, So that was already used in the creation of the polygon. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate around that same center just to keep things consistent. So I'll bring this one in, right? The geometry I want to rotate is all these curves. I plug that into geometry. I'm not going to worry about angle for now because I know where my plane is. I'm going to go back. I'm going to use the same plane I used as the center of my polygon, which was my initial construct point, right? So what this means is if I had created two different points, right? Let's just see what that looks like. If I created a different point for the rotation, and that point would have been out there somewhere, that would have basically meant that my geometry originates from one point, but it's rotating around another one. So, oh, that's not plugged in. Plane from the rotation. It's going to go to the same construct point we created for the polygons. I'm just illustrating what happens when you use a different point, right? So I'm going to hide everything except for my last two, so my merge and my rotation, just to compare those. So if I look at a top view, right? And here's the point from which this is the point that originated the polygon, right? However, that's the point it's rotating from, right? If I were rotating from this point, all I would see is this polygon just kind of circling with the same center, right? But because I moved that point it's rotating from, now it's kind of spiraling, right? Because the center of the polygon isn't matching with the center of the rotation. I'm now going to introduce an angle so that you see what I mean. So if I hover over angle, I see, oh, angle is defined by 0.5 times pi, right? So it may look complicated, but it's actually way simpler than you think. Pi, math, right? You go to the math tab, and under math, you maybe have operators. You can add numbers, you can multiply numbers, larger than, smaller than, so you can compare different sets of numbers. How about polynomials? Just look over here. Also no. Trig. Radians, okay, that relates to angles. Sine and cosine. So I have all these different mathematical functions, right, to define a number value for my angle. What I'm looking for really is pi, which I'm not, I might have hovered over it, but I didn't see it. So I'm going to search for it because I know it exists, pi. Right? Maybe it's under parameters. I'm not sure. It should be here in math somewhere, but I'm just going to search for pi, right? And if you see the output, it's just pi, right? But then it has a factor of 1. If you remember trig well, then you know you just multiply times pi, and then you're establishing a radius, right? So since this defaults to 0.5 pi, I'm going to go ahead and create a number slider between 0 and 1 with decimal places. And now I can alter that rotation, right? So this is what I'm talking about, right? Because that I'm rotating off of this point, right? So when I rotate that curve, it's rotating around that point, which creates a sort of spiraling effect, right? Which could be cool for a tower, but structurally unstable. So if I use the same point I originated the polygon with, I get a rotation around that point. You see the difference? Okay, so I'm going to keep it this way. That way, if I move this point, right, the rotation is going to happen the same way, right? I can change the location of the tower without affecting the rotation of the tower. And vice versa, right? If I want to affect the rotation, it's not going to affect the positioning of the tower. Okay, so now I'm just going to look at the newly rotated one, right? But now they're all rotating the same amount. So there's no real point, right? All I did was take all these symmetrical floors and rotate them the same amount. So they don't really look different. So I have to introduce another series, right? Where I maybe increment the amount of rotation that happens to get this sort of like spiraling effect, right? So it's the same thing. I can just copy paste this series, bring it over and plug it into pi. The thing is, here I was working with feet, and now I'm working with angles of rotation, right? I was only working from 0 to 1, right? So I need to change these numbers up. So I don't even need 40, I actually need one more, right? Because remember, we moved here to create 40, but then we added another curve to the list, right? So actually, instead of putting this to 41, I'm going to make this consistent. I'm going to add an addition component, and I'm going to add 40 to 1, right? Why is this significant? Because let's say I change my mind. I want 20 floors. I'm still maintaining consistency in the amount of values I need, right? When I introduce this rotation, whether it's 40, 41, or whatever before, or 20, 25, however many floors, it doesn't matter. This way I maintain consistency in the amount of data that I need, right? Does that make sense? Am I losing anybody?
Wait, so you go from A to where?
On the addition,
Yeah.
I want to add the count that I had for that first series, right? I want to add 1, right? The reason for that is after I moved and created 40 values that were moved, I added the original one to that list, right? So now when I rotate, I actually need one more value than I did in the previous series. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. Yeah.
The planes that were like rotated, they disappeared when I added the series into the factor.
This one right here isn't giving an output,
Yeah.
and you made sure that your plane is the same origin as your polygon.
Yeah. It only appears if
Okay.
a link among
Between 0 and 1? Okay. Let me get through this part with the numerical stuff, and then I can take a look at that after I'm done, okay? Just because we're running out of time. No, yeah. We got 40 minutes left, so I want to get through the ladybug and optimizing it. If people need help after, can they stick around and ask me questions? We'll talk about it. Okay.
I want to actually get into the
Revit.
how they can transfer that.
Right, to Revit, yeah, okay. So I'm going to switch gears here to radius, to rotation values. So I'm going to start at 0, right? So keep that original position for the lobby floor, right? The orientation it has is fine, so rotate 0. And then I'm going to make my step 0.1. Right? Oh, I have to change this number slider too. Just going to make the maximum 1, and I'm going to change this incremental rotation to 0.1, right? Now we see that, right? So we see that this first one down here, right, is receiving the first value of this list, right? And let's just take a look at this. So if I'm looking at the rotation values, right, and I'm also looking at the curves that I'm bringing into the rotation, we see that the first curve, which is the one at the bottom with index 0, I set it to rotate 0, right? So it's not rotating. The next one, curve 1, which would be the one right above it, this one right here, is rotating 0.314159, right? So it's matching those geometries to those values according to their index, right? And that's because both sets, right, the sets of curves and the sets of values are both only one branch, right? They're organized in the same way. They're just one single branch, right? Here we have branch 0 and here we have branch 0, 0. So unless they although they have different numbers, right, they have the same amount of values. So it's able to match 20 with 20, 19 with 19, and so on. What would happen if I didn't have this accounted for, right, that I have the right amount? If I put 40 on the rotation count, I have too many extra values here, right? I have almost double. So what's going to happen is on the last one, they're going to stack. It's going to say, okay, 20 with 20, and then, oh, there's 21, right? Oh, so just put 21 with 20, put 22 with 20, put 23 with 20, and so on. So it's stacking all these extra values on the last curve of this list, right? So that's why it's important to